I think Charlie is by far the strongest character in this film. The reason being is that for the first half, he is a complete dick. He's criminal, has no compassion for others, and is completely motivated by greed. He's basically a carbon copy of the film's villain Carface, just without the murderous tendencies. Which is why it actually feels so earned when he starts to develop sympathy for Anne-Marie, and gradually becomes a better person because of it. Anne-Marie herself is also a well-written character. Though there's not much depth to her, other than being the sweet innocent child, she still has that balance to make her a more realistic child, not being too overly sweet to the point that you'd start developing diabetes from her, as she also gets angry with Charlie and challenges him on his scheming. I think what really helps this character come across as strong as they are is the charm that the voice actor, Judith Barsi, brings to the role.
Promise? You'll help me find a mommy and daddy?
I promise.
Oh, Charlie!
Even before researching this film, I recognised her from the voice of Ducky from The Land Before Time.
You want to go with me? Yeah! Oh, oh yes, yes, yes! I do!
As she manages to bring that joyful, childlike innocence to the character she plays. It wasn't until after reading through the comments on my Land Before Time review that I found out that Judith was then tragically murdered by her father, and that All Dogs Go to Heaven was her final speaking role. A truly saddening ending to a girl who brought so much joy to the character she played on screen. The only other character I feel worth mentioning is Itchy, and Itchy is okay. At the start of the film, he kind of comes across as an annoying comic relief kind of character who does nothing but moan a lot. But as the film goes on, he does start to develop more into the third act as he has his heart-to-heart with Charlie.
She wants we should feed the poor, and the whole while I'm thinking this is stupid, she's gonna get us killed. But I stay because I'm your friend.
Now onto the film's strongest quality, the animation. The animation in this film is fantastic, and being a Don Bluth film, you would expect nothing less. There is a lot of movement and energy, with every frame feeling different from the last, and there's a nice balance between getting a realistic and cartoon look. The animals, for example, seem to have realistic and proportioned designs, but can also become more human-like and anthropomorphic when the scene demands it. Same for the facial expressions. In some cases you get a more neutral and natural look, but then when emotions need to be shown, they'll start to stretch and become a little more exaggerated. But it works. The humans, on the other hand, I don't know. They seem to have a much stiffer, more realistic anchor to them, holding very natural movement with very reserved facial expressions. The little girl Anne-Marie's design kind of reminded me of the Snow White design from Disney, and the woman that later goes on to adopt her kind of reminds me of Cinderella from Disney. The only negative I would say on the animation though is that it does lack some of the dramatic lighting, shading and palette changes that you'll see in other Don Bluth films, such as The Secret of Nymph and The Land Before Time. But overall, still brilliant animation. Alright, now let's talk about the censorship of this film. So as I mentioned earlier, this film was subject to a lot of censorship. Some of it is obvious and clearly evident, other parts are just theory and speculation. So let's start with the concrete evidence. The first and most blatantly obvious is the use of the ray gun.
But that doesn't look very futuristic.
For a film which is based during the 1930s, with a strong gangster theme embedded into it, it sure does feel very left field that our characters would suddenly come into possession with a science fiction ray gun.
Boss, pull me up, please! I got a gun!
Gun? What do you mean a gun? What kind of gun?
A Flash Gordon thermo-atomic ray gun, boss.
This was obviously meant to be something like a Tommy gun in the original draft, and I can only imagine this change was made very last minute when producers were worried about it being too violent for a kids film. As you can tell by the appearance of the gun, it was originally meant to be a Tommy gun, and all they did was simply add some laser firing sound effects over the top of it.
How do you stop this thing?
You can even see in Carface's lip movement right here, it's evidence with his stretched mouth movement he's saying an E sound, like a real gun, rather than the A sound where they have him awkwardly say,
A ray gun.
yeah, you're not fooling anyone, film. The second obvious cut is when Charlie is killed by the car at the start of the film. I mean, just look at the awkward jump cut where we go from the car being slightly pushed down the hill to it suddenly flying off the pier.
Keep a good dog down.
Clearly there was a scene here where we actually see Charlie getting struck by the car, but again, was cut at the last minute to keep the level of violence down. And the final cut we have evidence for is some extended scenes from Charlie's Nightmare in Hell. Nothing really critical is cut here, just a few close-ups of the demon dog, which I guess were considered too scary for kids, similar to how some of the Sharp-Tooth close-ups were cut from The Land Before Time. I suppose all of these cuts were made to give the film its U rating, or G for American audiences, which is weird considering some of the other films that managed to get away with a U rating. Authorship down. But also, this is clearly a film that was meant to have a more mature approach, with the heavy themes of gambling and drinking, not to mention the sexual undertones. I mean, let's face it, it's obvious Charlie was bonking this dog as a bit on the side.
We don't see much of you anymore.
Well, you know how it is. I mean, I got a business to run.
Yeah, I know how it is.
Not to mention the many quips here and there that only adults would really get.
These are some of the poorest people I know. They're broker than the Ten Commandments. Little joke.
Personally, I would have rather the film had just aimed for a PG rating instead. Then it could have kept more of the mature tone in. And I also think that this gearing towards kids led to some other changes too. And this is more where the speculation begins. The first being the musical songs. The musical songs are okay, but with the exception of Can't Keep a Good Dog Down, they aren't very memorable. And I think this is because they were also a last minute thought added to the film. See, when a film utilises a musical song correctly, it's normally done to give exposition to the audience and to move the narrative forward. Take The Lion King for example. Musical scores like Be Prepared tell us about Scar's plans and his motivations. Hakuna Matata allows Simba to get over his grief, and Can You Feel the Love Tonight develops the bond between Simba and Nala. In All Dogs Go to Heaven, apart from the song they sing in heaven to give Charlie the chance to steal the watch, the other tracks don't really do this. Can't Keep a Good Dog Down is a catchy song, but what does it do to further the plot? Anne-Marie's song is quite sweet, but again, we already know she's sad about not having a family, so why do we have this as well? Plus it's also kind of distractingly obvious that they've got some other actress to sing the lyrics.
Soon you'll come home, home to my heart.
And I'm not even going to talk about that weird song sung by the alligator with big lips.
Let's make music together. Let's make sweet harmony.
Seriously, what the fuck? Again, I think these songs were added to lighten the mood and make the film feel more appealing to kids, but overall, they just kind of bring the product down. Which is also perhaps the reason this film seems to have such a split plotline. Like I said, the start of the film seems to set up a gangster revenge kind of flick, with the constant reminder of death looming over. I think this was originally meant to be the main focus of the film, but then Anne-Marie was brought in as a character kids could relate to, and the whole story gets dragged into her focus during the second act. So what are my final thoughts? Well, I know I've complained a lot about this film, but to be honest, I still find it an enjoyable watch. Yes, the plot is a little contrived, as it seems to be trying to tell too many stories at once, but on their own grounds, they still work. The main plot focus of Charlie forming a bond with Anne-Marie is done the best, as it gets given the most time to flesh out, and you do feel the legitimacy of their friendship. Seeing Charlie go from cold-hearted and careless to making the ultimate sacrifice at the end does feel earned, and it definitely gives payoff for the emotional goodbye scene we get at the end.
Oh, Charlie, I'll miss you.
Yeah, well, I'll miss you too, Squeaker.
Charlie and Anne-Marie themselves are well written and play off each other. The animation makes this film visually pleasing, and the music, though not the strongest element, will still keep a certain song in your head by the end. And though I wouldn't say it was Don Bluth's best work, it's still a good film, and despite the fact it did quite poorly at the box office, it actually found its home on VHS, being one of the biggest selling VHS releases ever. Maybe it was more the fact that when this film was released, it was competing up against the Disney's Little Mermaid, and so took a bit of time to find its cult following. But I guess it just goes to show that you can't keep a good film down.
Can't keep a good dog down.